Hello, I'm Daniel, and along with Danny and Gabby during this presentation, we will be teaching you about the basics of creative writing.
So, what is creative writing? Well, it's any writing that goes outside of the bounds of normal professional, journalistic, academic, or even technical forms of literature, and can typically be identified by an emphasis on narrative craft, character development, and the use of literary tropes, or with various traditions of poetry and poetics.
So you may be wondering what the rules of creative writing are, and believe it or not, there are no rules. You can start by writing whatever comes to your mind and then try to turn that into a story. You can write it in any form, meaning as long as it's original, you can write a poem, an essay, a short story, a play, a novel, a personal essay, or even a song. Creative writing often starts with a few bullet points that may seem unrelated, but you can connect them. Some people also find it helpful to start off with an experience or story from their own life, and then build up on that story by adding fictional elements until it becomes a much bigger, more interesting one.
So for creative writing, there's something called a basic plot progression, and this is what it looks like. These five components, background, rising action, climax, falling action, and conclusion, are what make up the progression of most creative writing pieces. So starting with background, when creating a story, it's important to be thorough when introducing the characters and setting. So by doing this, the reader will feel more connected to the characters and the setting will become more familiar. During the rising action part of your story, you'll be able to expand on the introductory aspects of your plot. At this point, you'll want to explain with your storytelling why the setting is important and why the characters are the way they are, and how that affects the trajectory of your plot. For the climax of your story can be very fun to write because the background and rising action will aid with the heightening of the conflict between the characters and possibly their surroundings. For the falling action, you'll get to think about ways to resolve the conflict that was experienced by the characters during the climax. And as you prepare for the conclusion, it's important to address the cliffhangers that were left in previous parts of the story. And for your conclusion, you'll want to remind the reader of the beginning of the story and how the characters got to the point that they ended up in. And you'll also get to decide the tone of the conclusion, depending on the angle that you approach the story with in the beginning. So overall, paying attention to the plot progression will help with improving your basic storytelling and creative writing skills.
There are many elements that are a part of storytelling, but here are a few. The first element is the theme. What is the main idea of your story, and what message are you trying to convey? Not every story has to have one if you don't want to take it too seriously, but stories are always an excellent way to make a point and communicate a message you hope to spread. Then there's the setting, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's where and when your story takes place, and because it's creative writing, you have a ton of freedom with that. It can be anything you imagine. The plot is the sequence of events in your story and what happens. The plot is the most important part, but also the most fun. The rules are up to you, but you want to make it interesting to hook the reader. Keep it moving and make sure there's never a dull moment. Then there's also characters and how you characterize them. Your characters are the agents of your story who experience and carry out the events and the plot. Characters vary. You can have main characters or side characters. Main characters are the ones that your story focuses on the most, and then your side characters are there to help you flesh out the plot and give life to your main ones. Because it's creative writing, characters aren't necessarily limited to humans. So in theory, your main character could be a talking half dog, half cat sort of animal if you want. There's also characterization, as in you can't just drop a character in. Each one should have care and thought put into their specific story and who they are, so as not to leave holes that a reader might feel. Finally, there's conflict and drama. This is just a subset of the plot and a reminder to keep your story engaging. Whether it be a betrayal, a plot twist, or maybe a new character, always keep the reader hooked and on their toes, waiting for more. In short, make your story interesting.
So there are many literary tools used throughout creative writing. One important one is metaphors, which, as the slide says, are figures of speech in which a word or phrase is applied to an object or action, which is not literally applicable. Meaning you take one thing and apply something else to it, and though it doesn't make sense literally, there is a hidden meaning there. So an example of this is a famous song lyric, "Life is a highway." Life is obviously not a highway, but in the context of the song, you understand how it makes sense. Another important tool is imagery, or visually descriptive or figurative language that evokes one of the five senses. One example sentence shown on this slide is, "The old book had water spots across its spine. Some of the pages yellowed." This sentence plants an image in your head, and it makes the description of the book much more vivid. A trickier literary tool to use is allegory, which is when your entire story has a hidden meaning, which is only revealed at the end. The tortoise and the hare story is a famous example of an allegory. It is a fictional story drawn out about a race, but the hidden meaning is the final conclusion that slow and steady can win the race. Another common tool is called alliteration, which is when you use the same sound from the consonant at the beginning of many words in a row. Smooth, soft silk is a good example of alliteration. Finally, rhythm is an important tool, which can be defined in writing by punctuation and the stressing of patterns of words in a sentence. Rhythm can be added to sentences in many ways, including by changing up the length of sentences. For example, by having many shorter sentences followed by one longer one.
Now let's try some warm-up exercises to introduce you to creative writing. Write a short story about one of these prompts using all the imagination you can muster, and feel free to refer to what we taught you in the previous slides. No need to take it too seriously or vigorously revise and make it perfect, as this is just a warm-up to familiarize you with what creative writing is.